The sky burned red over Earth's capital cities, a cruel reminder of the alien invasion that had taken humanity to the brink of extinction. Every major metropolis had already fallen, cities reduced to smoldering rubble under the relentless onslaught of the Zarkar, a merciless, technologically superior race from a distant galaxy. Their ships, vast and intimidating, loomed over the remnants of human civilization like monstrous vultures. Inside the remnants of a shattered United Nations headquarters, President Evelyn Hayes stared at a map of Earth, her face pale, lined with the weight of a decision she never thought she'd have to make. The final reports had come in. Earth's last defense forces, including the elite planetary military and every available resource, had been crushed. Resistance was futile. Hope was fading fast. "Madam President, we have confirmation," General Kenneth Ruiz said, his voice heavy with defeat. "The Zarkar fleet is preparing to land on the last few strongholds. They'll be on the ground within hours." The room fell silent as every face turned toward the president. She could see it in their eyes, the terror, the disbelief, and the acceptance of humanity's imminent demise. The general continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've lost. There's no escaping it. Earth is theirs." President Hayes clenched her fists, refusing to accept it. "What about the last line of defense we activated? The defenders. Have we received word?" A communication officer stepped forward, holding a report. "Madam, there's nothing. The defenders, our best weapon, have not responded. We're on our own." It was a cruel irony. Humanity's final hope, a mysterious force known only as the Defenders, was the very reason Earth had any chance of holding on for as long as it had. But they had been shrouded in secrecy, built in the aftermath of humanity's early encounters with alien civilizations. Armed with weapons that defied physics and technology that even the Zarkar had yet to replicate, they were the last hope. But now, their silence spoke volumes. "I will not surrender," President Hayes declared, her voice trembling with a fierce defiance. "We will fight until our last breath." But deep down she knew, the battle was already over. The enemy was too strong, too swift, too lethal. As the president turned away from the map, her thoughts began to race. What if the defenders had failed? What if the aliens had already wiped them out before they could even launch their counterattack? A sudden surge of static interrupted the tense silence. The communication officer's eyes widened as he looked at his screen, then quickly tapped into the incoming signal. "Ma'am, we have contact," he stammered. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "From the defenders?" she asked urgently, moving toward the officer. He nodded, eyes wide with shock. "Yes, but it's not what we expected. We don't know how, but they're here, they've arrived." The room went silent. Everyone knew what that meant. The defenders weren't just a last-ditch effort. They were something more. Something beyond even human comprehension. "Patch it through," the president ordered. The screen flickered to life, and the room collectively gasped. A figure stood in the center of the transmission, tall, impossibly imposing. They were clad in armor so sleek it seemed to shimmer, reflecting the ruined world around them. Their face was obscured by a black helmet with an angular visor that glowed a dim blue. The voice that followed was deep, almost mechanical, yet somehow human in its intensity. "We are the defenders," it began. The words sent a ripple through the room. "We have arrived. Prepare for the end of the Zarkar." The message was clear. The defenders had arrived not to offer a last-ditch effort, but to end the invasion. The odds of survival had shifted, just as the flames of humanity's extinction seemed to lick at the edges of the earth. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, President Hayes felt something she hadn't dared to feel for so long: hope. The atmosphere inside the United Nations headquarters shifted as the towering figure on the screen paused, its glowing visor casting an eerie blue light over the war-torn room. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. What are you?" General Ruiz finally managed to say, his voice unsteady. The defender's voice, though mechanical, seemed to carry an underlying hum, as though the words themselves were something far beyond human understanding. "We are the defenders. We were created to protect, to end the tyranny of invaders. Your planet has been marked by the Zarkar, and they will fall. A ripple of disbelief spread through the room. The Zarkar, an alien race that had ravaged hundreds of worlds, had long been feared for their brutal tactics and advanced technology. No one, not even the most well-armed human forces, had ever imagined standing a chance against them. Yet, here was a figure, calm, composed, and standing at the edge of a storm that could rewrite the course of history. "Why haven't you intervened before?" President Hayes asked, her voice trembling, still grappling with the enormity of what was happening. Why now? Why wait until Earth was nearly lost? The Defenders' response was cryptic. "We are bound by a protocol created by those who engineered us. We intervene only when a species is on the verge of total annihilation, when there is nothing left but the will to fight. We were activated only when all hope was gone." The words hit hard, a reminder that humanity had been left to its own devices, struggling to survive. Yet now, in their darkest hour, they were given a glimpse of something that defied reason and science. "How do we fight them?" General Ruiz asked urgently, cutting through the tense silence. "We have no forces left. We're outnumbered, outgunned. The Zarkar are too powerful. How can we stand against them?" The Defender's voice softened, but there was no pity in it, only cold certainty. "We are not here to give you the means to fight. We are the means. We are the weapon you need. The Zarkar are not prepared for us. They will learn that their victory was never assured." As the transmission ended, the room buzzed with uncertainty and anticipation. What did this mean for humanity? How could a single force, one shrouded in mystery and secrecy, possibly match the vast Zarkar fleet? There were too many questions and not enough answers. But one thing was certain: something ancient and powerful had arrived, and Earth was no longer helpless. Hours later, President Hayes stood on the balcony of a United Nations building, overlooking the desolate cityscape of what was once New York. The city, a monument to human ambition, now lay in ruins, half-fallen skyscrapers, smoldering wreckage, and streets littered with debris. The Zarkar had shown no mercy, erasing the heart of humanity's strength with clinical efficiency. Yet, as she gazed out over the destruction, a strange calm settled within her. Something had changed. The feeling was palpable. The Defenders weren't just a last resort, they were a force. A reckoning. Beside her, General Ruiz, who had become a shadow of the man he was before the invasion, stood silently, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I can feel it," he muttered. "The ground, it's trembling." She turned to him. "What do you mean?" "The air, the ground, everything feels different. Like the Defenders are already here." Ruiz's voice was tinged with awe. Before she could respond, a low hum filled the air. It was so faint at first that only the most sensitive ears could hear it. But soon, the sound grew, vibrating through the very earth beneath their feet. In the distance, a streak of light cut across the sky, a blinding trail that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The hum intensified, and the ground beneath them trembled in earnest. "We've been found," Hayes whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the rising crescendo. "They're here." The ground shook again, but this time it wasn't a rumble. It was a force, a presence. And as the skyline lit up with a sudden brilliance, a fleet of sleek, impossibly advanced ships appeared overhead. They moved with precision, their movements so fluid that it seemed as if the air itself was bending to accommodate their arrival. They were not like the Zarkar ships, massive and oppressive. These ships were clean, almost elegant, with intricate patterns across their surfaces, glowing faintly as they hovered. Each ship was unlike anything human engineers had ever seen, and yet they exuded a sense of power that could not be ignored. President Hayes's heart raced, a cold thrill running down her spine. This was it, the beginning of humanity's salvation, or its final end. From the sky, a voice echoed, not from a speaker, but from the very air itself. "Prepare, Earth. Your defenders have arrived." And just like that, the battle for humanity's survival had truly begun. The city trembled beneath the might of the defenders' arrival. Every street, every building seemed to hum with an energy that had not been felt in ages. The Zarkar had always ruled through overwhelming force, their ships a constant reminder of their dominance. But now, with the defenders above them, the world seemed to shift into an uneasy equilibrium. President Hayes stood at the edge of the balcony, her eyes fixed on the sky, where the defenders' ships hung like silent sentinels. Their sleek forms reflected the fading sunlight, and yet they did not seem of this world. They exuded an unnatural aura, their energy so pure and unyielding that it was impossible to mistake their purpose. These beings were not here to talk, they were here to fight. General Ruiz, still standing beside her, spoke, his voice full of disbelief. They're not waiting for a command. They're already engaging. Far below, the remaining Zarkar forces, scattered and preparing to encircle the final bastions of human resistance, paused as if sensing a shift in the air. The Zarkar ships, once towering with malicious presence, seemed unnerved by the defenders' ships overhead. And then, as if the defenders had read their thoughts, a blinding flash erupted from one of the massive ships, its energy rippling outwards, disintegrating a Zarkar warship in a matter of seconds. A ripple of shock ran through the Zarkar fleet. The earth shook beneath them as another burst of energy, a cascading wave of pure force, struck another ship, this time knocking it out of the sky with an explosion so fierce it created a cloud of vaporized metal. "It's begun," Ruiz whispered, his voice almost reverent. From the heart of the Zarkar fleet, a massive command vessel, the size of a small moon, began to accelerate toward Earth. The energy radiating from it was undeniable. This was their flagship. It was here to end the fight. But before anyone could respond, the ground split open with the roar of an incoming attack. The sky darkened as one of the defenders' ships dove toward the planet, its shape shifting as it neared the atmosphere. It moved with the kind of speed that defied understanding, slicing through the air as if gravity itself had no hold on it. "No way they're landing?" President Hayes gasped. "On the Zarkar's flagship? Are they insane?" But the defender's ship was already plunging towards the heart of the Zarkar fleet. With a deafening roar, it entered the atmosphere and shot toward the monstrous Zarkar flagship, which had opened fire, unleashing a flurry of deadly projectiles. The moment the defender ship made contact with the Zarkar vessel, the air itself seemed to shudder. A shock wave rippled through the sky, and the flagship faltered, as though something had struck it to its very core. It was as though the defender ship was alive, each movement deliberate and precise, avoiding the Zarkar's retaliatory strikes with near impossible agility. "That's impossible," General Ruiz muttered, unable to tear his eyes away from the chaotic display. "Their ships are faster than anything we've ever seen." And there, the defender ship then did the unthinkable. It phased. It disappeared. One moment it was there, a gleaming presence in the sky, and the next it was gone. A moment later, an explosion rocked the Zarkar flagship from within, sending a massive shockwave through the fleet. The defender ship had somehow phased inside the flagship itself, detonating from within. The flagship, the symbol of Zarkar dominance, began to crumble. Pieces of the once mighty vessel scattered in every direction, burning with the light of its own destruction. The defenders were not here to play by the rules. They were here to win. As the Zarkar flagship collapsed, Earth's defenders below watched in stunned silence. In that moment, it felt as though the world had exhaled, its breath held for far too long. Yet the destruction wasn't over. The skies were still dark, and the Zarkar fleet was far from broken. The remnants of the once unified invasion force began to regroup, more desperate, angrier, their commands now erratic. "Is it over?" President Hayes asked, her voice thick with disbelief. "No," Ruiz replied, his voice grim. "That was just a warning shot." On the ground, the remaining Zarkar forces were now charging, their forces running towards Earth's final strongholds. Yet the momentum had shifted. Humanity had not surrendered. The defenders were here, and with them, a glimmer of hope. And yet, as their energy and their ships continued to devastate the Zarkar fleet, the question lingered. Was this enough? Could the defenders really end the invasion, or would Earth still face total annihilation? Only time would tell. The streets of New York had become a battlefield. The once vibrant city had been reduced to ruins, its skyline punctured by the skeletal remains of toppled skyscrapers, smoldering craters where alien weapons had torn through the earth. Yet in the heart of this devastation, humanity stood its ground, defiant, even as the Zarkar forces closed in. It was a strange new world, where survivors and defenders alike could feel the electric pulse of something other, something more than human, in the air. The defenders were here, their presence like a whisper on the wind, a promise of final reckoning. But could they really be the key to humanity's survival? President Hayes stood in the war room, surrounded by the few remaining generals and strategists who had managed to escape the chaos outside. The holographic map in front of her displayed the movements of both the Zarkar and the defenders, two forces locked in a violent life-and-death struggle for control of Earth. "It's not just about defeating them anymore," General Ruiz said, his face grim as he studied the map. "The Zarkar are not just trying to conquer, they're trying to wipe out all signs of resistance. The attacks on our cities are meant to leave nothing. If we don't push back hard enough, we'll be nothing but a memory." "I know," Hayes replied, her voice firm. "We have no choice but to fight. But we're not doing this alone anymore." The defenders. Before she could finish, the sound of a low, rumbling blast echoed through the air. Everyone in the room paused, instinctively looking at the screens. The ground shook, and for a split second, it felt as though the very world had trembled. The defenders' ship formations above had split again, this time circling Earth like a swarm of celestial vultures. Something big was coming. "That wasn't one of our forces," Ruiz said, his eyes narrowing. "That's them." It was happening. The final phase of the Zarkar assault had begun. But this time, they weren't just attacking from above. The Zarkar had brought their ground forces to bear, large, menacing combat walkers, towering machines designed to crush anything in their path. The first of them appeared on the outskirts of the city, their massive, armored legs shaking the earth with every step. They were like creatures from some alien nightmare. Each one was a towering, multi-legged machine of destruction, armed with energy cannons and missile pods that could level entire neighborhoods with a single shot. "Can the defenders handle them?" one of the commanders asked, his voice full of apprehension. "They're not just here to defend," Hayes replied. "They're here to end this. We have to trust them." As the first of the Zarkar walkers loomed closer, their weapons primed for devastation, the sky above seemed to shudder. And then, the defenders struck. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. A wave of energy pulsed from the center of the defender fleet, emanating from a central flagship that was now hovering over the city like a guardian angel. The blast hit the first Zarkar walker head-on, and before anyone could react, the machine exploded in a violent burst of energy. The shock wave sent debris scattering in every direction, creating a massive crater where the walker had once stood. A collective gasp echoed through the war room. The Zarkar had underestimated them. The defenders were not just a threat, they were unstoppable. But as more walkers appeared, the battle raged on, fierce and unforgiving. The streets filled with the sounds of weapons fire, both human and alien. Each Zarkar walker was quickly met with a counterattack. Defender ships streaking through the air, taking out one after another with pinpoint precision. Every explosion was a testament to the defenders' lethal efficiency. But the Zarkar were relentless. They came in waves. The battle spread from New York to other parts of the world. Every major city now a battleground between humanity's final forces and the overwhelming Zarkar invaders. The defenders were everywhere, seemingly able to appear and disappear at will. They phased through the enemy lines, striking from all angles. Their weapons, a blend of advanced technology and near-mystical energy, decimated the Zarkar forces at a staggering rate. But the Zarkar, no matter how many they lost, kept coming. Their forces were vast, their numbers endless. President Hayes watched the battle unfold on the holographic map, her pulse quickening as the situation became increasingly dire. Despite the overwhelming strength of the defenders, humanity's forces were stretched thin. Earth's defenders were becoming more exhausted with each passing hour. Then, a transmission came through, cutting through the static like a sword. It was the defender leader, the same one from the initial transmission. "We are making progress," the voice said, cold and clinical. "But the Zarkar have brought their full force to bear. We are securing the planet, but your people must hold on. The last phase of this battle will be won with your strength." There was no time to question. Hayes nodded sharply, her gaze hardening. "Tell the people to hold their ground. Reinforcements are coming." And with that, the message ended. As the battle raged on, something began to shift in the hearts of Earth's survivors. The weight of their hopelessness was being lifted, replaced by a hard, gritty resolve. Humanity was not going to go quietly. They would fight with everything they had, and if they died, they would die as a force, unified, defiant, and with the defenders beside them. And as the last of the Zarkar ground forces began to retreat, it became clear, Earth was not finished yet. The battle for Earth had escalated beyond what anyone had imagined. Across the globe, the Zarkar forces were retreating, at least for the moment. Their once unified fleet had fractured under the relentless assault of the defenders. Cities that had seemed lost were now on the brink of recovery, thanks to the precision and power of the enigmatic beings that had arrived to save humanity. But even in the face of victory, the fight was far from over. Inside the war room, President Hayes stood over the holographic map of the world, watching the shifting dynamics as the battle unfolded in real time. General Ruiz was at her side, his face etched with fatigue, but also a flicker of cautious optimism. "We've pushed them back, but they're not done," Ruiz said, his tone more sober than it had been hours ago. "Their remaining ships are retreating toward their stronghold in the orbit of Saturn, but they won't stay there for long. They're regrouping." Hayes didn't respond immediately. She was lost in thought, watching the scattered Zarkar forces retreat into the depths of space, like vultures seeking higher ground. Yet she knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. The Zarkar were relentless, and they would strike again, with even greater force. "Have a defender said anything?" she asked, her voice still carrying the weight of a woman who had spent too many sleepless nights contemplating humanity's fate. Ruiz looked at his screen. "We've received word from them. They're reinforcing their positions around the planet's atmosphere, preparing for another strike." There, he was cut off by a sudden transmission, its eerie hum filling the room. It wasn't from the defenders. It was a broadcast from the heart of the Zarkar fleet. "Turn it up," Hayes ordered, her voice steely. The transmission flickered to life, showing an image of the Zarkar warlord, the leader of the invasion. His alien features were sharp, his eyes gleaming with contempt. Behind him, a vast backdrop of stars stretched into infinity, and the sense of dread was palpable. His voice, cold and arrogant, boomed through the room. "You, who call yourselves humans, have forgotten your place in the universe. You were nothing before we came, and you will be nothing when we return." The image shifted to a more graphic display, the destruction of one of Earth's key spaceports. The Zarkar had launched an assault just hours ago, tearing through humanity's remaining off-world infrastructure. They were sending a message. Earth was theirs to destroy. "Prepare yourselves," the warlord sneered. "We will return, and we will make sure that no trace of you survives." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had started, leaving the war room in an oppressive silence. For a moment, there was no sound, no movement, as everyone absorbed the weight of the threat. "We can't let them regroup," Hayes said finally, her voice hard. "We need to take the fight to them." Ruiz looked at her, surprised. "How? We're barely holding on here. Our resources are stretched thin, and the defenders have done all they can." She turned toward the large screen at the center of the room, where a holographic image of the Zarkar's stronghold in the orbit of Saturn appeared. It was a massive structure, brimming with warships and armed forces, more than anything humanity had ever faced. "We don't take the fight to them," Hayes said, her eyes narrowing. "The defenders do. We send them a message that this isn't over. They've underestimated humanity before. They'll do it again. The defenders, stationed just outside Earth's atmosphere, had heard the warlord's message. Their ships had paused their relentless attacks, hovering in the vast silence of space as they processed the transmission. Then, without a word, they made their move. A single defender ship, sleek and predatory, broke off from the formation and shot into deep space toward the Zarkar stronghold. Its movements were precise, calculated, like a beast preparing for the hunt. It didn't need an army. It didn't need reinforcements. It needed only the will to end this war. As it neared the Zarkar stronghold, the ship phased, vanishing from the view of the enemy fleet, reappearing inside the massive structure. Inside the heart of the Zarkar bastion, the defenders wreaked havoc with devastating speed. Their weapons ripped through the Zarkar defenses like paper, annihilating entire sectors of the enemy stronghold. The Zarkar had no answer. Nothing in their arsenal could stop the defenders. As the destruction unfolded, President Hayes watched in awe. The tide was shifting. The defenders were not merely responding. They were taking the initiative. For the first time, humanity's enemies were on the defensive. Hours later, the Zarkar warlord, cornered in his own stronghold, sent another message. This one was different. There was no arrogance, no threats, just the cold, brutal reality of defeat. "You have fought well," he said, his voice now devoid of its previous venom. "But we are not the ones who will fall." The transmission cut out before anyone could respond. And with it, a final message appeared on the war room screens. The Zarkar fleet had initiated an emergency retreat. The invasion had ended, and humanity had won, for now. The aftermath was nothing short of a miracle. Earth had held its ground, thanks to the defenders. But there was no time to celebrate. The remnants of the Zarkar fleet were still out there, somewhere in the galaxy, nursing their wounds. And humanity, along with its mysterious protectors, now stood on the precipice of a new chapter. A chapter that could either see them rise or fall again. "We've won," Hayes whispered to herself. But for how long? And somewhere in the distance, the defenders watched, their purpose fulfilled for the moment, but their vigilance never ceasing. The dust was beginning to settle on Earth. Cities that had been reduced to rubble were slowly being rebuilt, their people returning to their homes, though much had been lost in the wake of the Zarkar invasion. The air was filled with a sense of cautious optimism. The defenders had delivered humanity from the brink of extinction, and the Zarkar were in retreat, their forces scattered across the galaxy. But for President Hayes and General Ruiz, the sense of victory was tempered by a nagging feeling. Despite the defeat of the Zarkar fleet, something felt incomplete. The battle for Earth had been brutal, but this was only one chapter of a much larger story. The Zarkar had invaded with their full might, and though they had lost, they had proven resilient. And if the Zarkar were this dangerous, what else lurked out there, beyond the stars? Inside the war room, the atmosphere was tense, despite the celebrations happening in the streets below. Hayes stood by the window, gazing at the stars, her mind wandering. "We've won," she muttered, as if convincing herself. But for how long? General Ruiz, standing beside her, shared her unease. "We've barely scratched the surface. The Zarkar were a force to be reckoned with, but there are others out there. I've seen enough to know this war has opened a door. The galaxy is far more dangerous than we ever imagined." Before Hayes could respond, the room was flooded with an urgent transmission. The screen flickered to life, revealing an unfamiliar symbol, the sigil of the defenders. "This is Commander Varn," a calm, yet emotionless voice said. "We need to speak." Varn's image appeared before them, an alien figure, tall and imposing, his form partially obscured by the darkened background of a distant star. His voice was the same as the one that had first spoken to Earth, but this time there was a tinge of gravity, something far heavier in his tone. "We have made significant progress in eliminating the remaining Zarkar forces," Varn began. "However, a far more immediate threat has emerged. One that threatens not only Earth, but the entirety of the galaxy." Hayes stepped forward, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "The Zarkar are retreating. We've seen their ships leave orbit." Varn's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes flashed with something akin to urgency. The Zarkar were only the tip of the spear. There is a greater force coming. We've detected an enemy fleet on the outer rim of the galaxy. A race we call the Wrather. They are ancient, powerful, and their appetite for conquest is insatiable. General Ruiz frowned. "If these Wrather are so dangerous, why didn't you intervene earlier? Why wait until the Zarkar were already here?" "We were bound by our mandate," Varn explained. "The Defenders are a creation of a lost civilization. We cannot act unless the balance is disturbed. The Zarkar were a significant disturbance, and now their failure has attracted the Wrather. We cannot allow them to continue." President Hayes felt her stomach tighten. "So what now? Are we to fight them like we fought the Zarkar?" Varn nodded. "You will. But this time we will not fight alone." Before either of them could ask for more details, the image flickered again. The transmission cut off without warning, leaving them in stunned silence. The next few days were filled with frenetic activity as the remaining human forces and the Defenders began preparations for the next battle. The world had barely had time to recover from the Zarkar onslaught, but there was no time to mourn the dead or rebuild in peace. They were facing a new enemy, one that could be even more dangerous than the last. President Hayes and General Ruiz stood together on the edge of the rebuilt Pentagon's command center, watching as new fleets of Defender ships took position in Earth's orbit. This time, however, there were no illusions about the scale of what was coming. The Zarkar had been brutal, but the Wrather were a different kind of enemy, ancient, merciless, and cunning. "We're not ready," Ruiz muttered, breaking the silence. "No one ever is," Hayes replied grimly. "But we don't have a choice." The feeling of the unknown hung heavy in the air. The Defenders had proven themselves capable, but humanity's forces were stretched thin. The Zarkar invasion had left deep scars, and while the Defenders had been an unexpected ally, it was still unclear just how much trust could be placed in them. Then there was the question of their mysterious origins. The Defenders were a force of unparalleled power, but they were also an enigma. Varn had told them only what was necessary, leaving more questions than answers. Why were they created? Who had made them? And most troubling of all, why had they waited until humanity was on the brink of extinction to intervene? As Hayes and Ruiz walked through the command center, preparations were already underway. Defense systems were being upgraded, new weapons tested, and training protocols adapted to incorporate the knowledge gained from the Zarkar War. But amidst all the activity, a silent tension lingered. The Wrather were coming, and this time, humanity had no idea what to expect. Days passed, and the final fleet of Defenders arrived in orbit. A massive energy shield surrounded the Earth, keeping both the remnants of the Zarkar fleet and any new enemies at bay. It was humanity's last line of defense, and they were not going to let it fall. But as Hayes watched the fleet overhead, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their problems were far from over. She glanced up at the stars, the vast unknown stretching out before her. What if this was just the beginning? What if there were worse threats than the Wrather? An endless tide of invaders, each more terrifying than the last. The sound of the transmission console ringing pulled her from her thoughts. It was from the Defenders. President Hayes, General Ruiz. Varn's voice echoed through the room. "We have a new enemy on the horizon. Prepare yourselves." The atmosphere inside the command center was heavy with anticipation. Every screen, every panel, every sensor was active as humanity prepared to face a new and terrifying foe, the Wrather. The mysterious beings from the outer rim of the galaxy had made their presence known, and their reputation was one that struck fear even in the hearts of the Defenders. President Hayes and General Ruiz stood at the forefront, their eyes locked on the holographic projection before them. The Wrather fleet was vast, larger than anything humanity had faced, even more than the Zarkar's massive armada. The image that flickered on the screens was almost abstract, a mass of dark ships, organic in design, moving slowly but relentlessly toward Earth. "Their ships are unlike anything we've seen," Ruiz muttered. "They move like living things, alive and yet cold." I'm more concerned about what's inside them, Hayes replied. What are these Wrather, and why are they coming for us? Varn's voice filled the room once more, cutting through the rising tension. The Wrather are a predatory species, ancient beyond understanding. Their empire stretches across galaxies, but they do not conquer like the Zarkar. They consume. They enslave. They erase entire civilizations. And now they have set their sights on Earth. Hayes clenched her fists. How do we fight them? If their fleet is so massive, what chance do we stand? Varn's image flickered. Your chances, as always, lie in your will to survive. The Wrather are not like the Zarkar. Their technology is far more advanced, but they have one fatal flaw: complacency. They believe themselves invincible. We have fought them before, and we will fight them again. But this time, you must be ready for what comes next. The holographic map shifted, zooming in on a particular ship in the Wrather fleet. It was massive, larger than anything Earth had ever seen, its silhouette cast in shadow. The ship appeared to pulse, as if it were breathing, living, thriving with an ominous energy. That ship, Varn continued, is their flagship. It is not just a vessel. It is the source of their power. If you destroy it, you will cripple their entire fleet. But how? Ruiz asked. The Wrather don't fight like the Zarkar. How can we possibly take down something like that? Varn's gaze darkened. The Wrather's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. Their fleet is connected. One mind, one collective consciousness. The flagship is the heart of this connection. Cut it out, and the rest will fall. Hayes nodded slowly, processing the gravity of the situation. The Wrather weren't just invaders, they were predators, driven by hunger, moving across the stars as if they were simply harvesting their next meal. They didn't just conquer planets, they consumed them. How do we destroy it? She asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. We are preparing to send a small team to infiltrate the flagship, Varn said. The defenders have the technology to phase inside their ships, but the flagship is well protected. The Wrather will not let anyone approach it easily. You must act quickly, or Earth will become their next feast. In the days that followed, preparations began for a bold, desperate mission. The defenders, ever watchful, offered what assistance they could: new weapons, new tactics, new technologies. But it was clear that this battle would be unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The defenders had never fought the Wrather directly before, but they had studied them. And now, humanity's forces would need to learn quickly. A team of the most elite soldiers, human and defender alike, was selected. Among them was Captain Lara Vance, a decorated war hero and one of the first humans to work alongside the defenders. She had been briefed on the stakes, and there was no hesitation in her eyes. She would be part of the infiltration team that would breach the Wrather flagship and disable its core. The mission was simple but not easy: penetrate the flagship, destroy its central command, and return before the entire Wrather fleet could react. The plan was risky, and there was no guarantee that even the defenders' technology could get them out alive. As the team boarded their specialized ship, Captain Vance stood at the helm, looking out at the massive fleet of Wrather ships that loomed beyond Earth's orbit. The task ahead was daunting, but there was no turning back. The fate of the planet rested on their shoulders. The mission began with a precise strike, small, coordinated, and deadly. The defender ship that would carry them toward the flagship phased in and out of space, avoiding detection by the Wrather ships that orbited their enormous flagship like a swarm of dark, metallic insects. The journey was long, and the tension was palpable as the team prepared for the assault. At the heart of the Wrather flagship, the air was thick with a strange, oppressive energy. The ship's corridors were alive, like veins pumping the lifeblood of an ancient, malevolent organism. The team moved swiftly through the labyrinthine interior, guided only by the advanced tech given to them by the defenders. "What is this place?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice filled with awe and fear. "It's like we're inside a living creature." "It is alive," Captain Vance replied. "The Wrather's ships aren't machines. They're part of their collective consciousness. We're not just infiltrating a ship, we're about to invade their mind." As they neared the core of the flagship, they encountered resistance. The Vrather defenders, humanoid in appearance but with grotesque, insectoid features, began to appear. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, their bodies seemingly merging with the ship's walls. The battle that ensued was unlike any Captain Vance had ever fought. The Vrather were relentless. Every strike they made felt like it came from the ship itself. The team fought back, using the specialized weaponry and the defenders' technology, but the Vrather seemed to anticipate their every move. Then they reached the central core, the beating heart of the Vrather flagship. It was not a traditional command center. Instead, it was a living organism, an amalgamation of metal, flesh, and dark energy. The team set their charges, knowing that the next move would be their last. "Get ready," Vance said, her voice sharp. "Once we blow this, we'll have minutes, seconds, before the whole fleet reacts. Get out of here fast." The countdown began. The explosion was cataclysmic. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Then the core of the Vrather flagship erupted in a violent surge of light and energy, sending shockwaves through the very fabric of the ship. The ground shook beneath Captain Vance and her team as the very walls of the ship seemed to recoil, pulsing and convulsing with the death throes of the heart of the Vrather fleet. "Move! Now!" Vance screamed, her voice hoarse with urgency. The team sprinted toward the nearest escape route, the walls buckling and bending around them. The once sterile corridors of the Vrather ship were now a nightmare of cracking, organic material, and violent sparks. The Vrather, like sentient shadows, rushed to intercept them, but the damage was too severe for even their formidable strength to overcome. The Vrather flagship was dying. But it wasn't just the ship's death that terrified them. It was the consequences of their actions. The explosion had severed the link between the flagship and the rest of the fleet, but not before triggering a cascading chain reaction across the Vrather armada. One by one, the massive ships began to disintegrate into fragments, their hulls warping as they collapsed inward like a star about to go supernova. The entire fleet was unraveling, but with it came an unstoppable wave of destruction. The team barely managed to escape through a narrow breach in the hull of the ship, the wreckage of the Vrather fleet crashing down around them as they reached the final phase of their escape. The defender's ship, which had been waiting in orbit, phased back into normal space just in time to scoop them up, but the Vrather fleet was far from completely gone. A few stragglers remained, their twisted remnants still lashing out with what little power they had left. "We've done it," Captain Vance said, her voice raw with exhaustion. "But this isn't over. The Vrather are wounded, but they're not dead." Back on Earth, President Hayes was anxiously watching the battle unfold in real time. The Vrather's fleet was collapsing under the strain of its disintegration, but the damage was still significant. Thousands of Vrather vessels, now scattered and in disarray, could still potentially pose a threat. Humanity's forces and the defenders scrambled to secure the remnants of the fleet before they could regroup or retaliate. Ruiz stood at her side, his brow furrowed. "They're not gone. Even with the flagship down, they're still a threat." "We need to keep pressure on them," Hayes replied, her voice determined. "Send our forces out to mop up. We've seen the defenders do the impossible before, and we're not stopping now." But as the last of the Vrather ships burned into the atmosphere, Hayes knew that the worst was still to come. The fight was not just for Earth's survival. It was for humanity's place in the galaxy. Back aboard the defender ship, Captain Vance's team staggered into the medical bay, battered and bruised, but alive. As she collapsed into a seat, her mind was a swirl of thoughts. They had destroyed the Vrather flagship, dealt a devastating blow to their fleet, but at what cost? "We didn't just fight them, did we?" one of her team members said quietly. "We broke them." Vance nodded. "We didn't just defeat their ships. We broke their will, their connection to the fleet. And that's what destroyed them. But this war, it's far from over." She stood, looking out through the transparent walls of the medical bay, gazing into the vastness of space. Earth was still there, still standing, but something had shifted. The defenders had played their part, but there was more to the universe than either the Zarkar or the Vrather. The galaxy was full of forces that could reshape worlds, and humanity was now a player on a much larger stage. The weight of it all hung on her shoulders. Could humanity truly survive the larger cosmic game, or were they doomed to be pawns? On Earth, President Hayes was receiving new intel from the Defenders. The Wrather were scattered, but the remnants of their fleet had gone into hiding, retreating into the uncharted depths of the galaxy. A temporary silence hung in the air as the tension eased, but everyone knew that the victory was hard-won and fragile. "Hayes, we've got a transmission," Ruiz said, his voice low. He handed her the pad. The transmission was from the Defenders, and it was different from the ones they had received before. This wasn't just an update or tactical information. It was a warning. The Wrather were but one faction. Varn's voice echoed, clear and unyielding. The galaxy is full of such creatures, each more dangerous than the last. The Wrather were mere scouts, sent to test the waters. And now, the true threat approaches. President Hayes' stomach clenched. "What do you mean, the true threat? You have seen only a glimpse of the darkness that lies beyond. The Wrather are part of a larger collective, one that spans galaxies. The beings they serve, the ones who control the Wrather, are coming. And they are far more advanced, far more brutal than you can imagine." Hayes turned to General Ruiz. "How long do we have?" Varn's image flickered, and for the briefest of moments there was something in his expression, something almost human, before it disappeared. "Not long. Prepare yourselves, Earth. The Harbingers are coming." The room fell into stunned silence. The Defenders had been humanity's lifeline, but if this new threat was as formidable as they seemed, the galaxy was about to be engulfed by something far darker. "The Harbingers," Ruiz whispered. "Who are they?" Varn's transmission cut off before they could ask more questions. The Defenders had their own enemies to prepare for, enemies that were not just coming for Earth, but for all of humanity. As the minutes stretched into hours, Hayes looked at the screens in front of her, her mind racing. The Wrather were gone, but the true war was only just beginning. If humanity didn't rise, if they didn't stand united against the coming storm, their place in the universe would be marked not by victory, but by annihilation. The days following the transmission were filled with frantic preparation, as Earth's leaders scrambled to organize defense forces and secure alliances with the Defenders. The warning from Varn about the Harbingers echoed in President Hayes' mind, an ancient, insidious force poised to descend on humanity like a dark storm. If the Wrather were a taste of what was to come, the Harbingers were something far worse. Humanity had tasted victory, but it was a victory born of desperation and luck. Now, standing on the edge of the unknown, they had no illusions about the scale of the war that lay ahead. In the command center, Hayes stood over a massive map of a solar system. The Wrather were scattered, their fleet decimated, but the Harbingers were coming, fast. Reports had begun to trickle in from deep space observatories, and the Defenders had confirmed that the Harbingers were already on the move. Their ships were beyond anything humanity could comprehend, far more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. "How long until they arrive?" Hayes asked, her voice quiet but heavy with resolve. General Ruiz, his face a mask of concern, tapped the control panel. "Less than a month. If they move as quickly as the Wrather did, we may have just days to prepare." The room fell into silence. The weight of those words was unbearable. But President Hayes refused to break. "We'll have to move faster than we ever have before. The Defenders are preparing, but it's not enough. We need everything, our best weapons, our finest soldiers. Get the entire military on high alert. We're not waiting for them to come to us. We'll meet them at the edge of the system if we have to." Aboard the Defender ship, Captain Vance and her team were recovering from their harrowing escape from the Wrather flagship. But as the transmissions from Earth grew more urgent, Vance's mind was already set on the next mission. There would be no rest. The Harbingers were the next threat, and there was no time to lose. She met with Varn in the ship's command room, a dimly lit chamber that seemed to hum with quiet power. The alien commander's face was unreadable as usual, but there was something different in his eyes, an understanding of the gravity of what was to come. "Tell me what we're dealing with," Vance demanded, her voice sharp with determination. "Who are these Harbingers? Why have they come?" Varn's voice echoed in the dark room, his words carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. The Harbingers are a race older than most of the galaxy. They are not conquerors like the Zarkar or the Wrather. They are something far more dangerous. They are observers, a cosmic force that seeks to annihilate any civilization that poses a threat to the natural order. They are the end of the line for any species that becomes too advanced, too powerful. They do not come to negotiate. They do not come to conquer. They come to end. Vance's stomach twisted. So, they wipe out entire species? No mercy. No mercy, Varn confirmed, his tone cold. The Harbingers have done this before, countless times. They are the Harbingers of entropy, the enforcers of balance. When a species reaches the point where they threaten the established order of the galaxy, the Harbingers are dispatched to extinguish them. So what chance do we have? Vance asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and defiance. We fight, Varn said simply. It is the only choice we have. But know this, the Harbingers do not fear death. They fear only that which disrupts their balance. We must fight not just for survival, but for the very right to exist. Back on Earth, President Hayes and General Ruiz were preparing to rally their forces. Every nation on Earth was now united in a common cause. They had faced the Zarkar, survived the Wrather, but the true test was about to begin. The Harbingers would not care about the alliances humanity had formed. They would not care about Earth's defenses, its history, or its people. The Harbingers would only care about one thing: extinguishing the threat Earth represented. Hayes stood before a massive, assembled group of the world's top military leaders. This is not just another battle. This is the fight for humanity's future. We know what they are. We know their power. But they do not know us. They do not understand the will of mankind. The Wrather, the Zarkar, they thought they could break us. But we are still standing, and we will fight to our last breath. Her eyes locked with each of the commanders in front of her. We are not alone in this fight. The defenders will stand with us. But we must show them that we are worth saving, that we are worth protecting. And we will do that by standing together. A murmur of agreement passed through the room, followed by a thunderous cheer. Despite the fear, despite the unknown, humanity was not about to back down. As the clock ticked down, the first signs of the Harbinger's fleet began to appear at the edge of the solar system. The defender ships, now in Earth's orbit, scanned the incoming ships, sending back reports to the command center. Varn, Hayes said, her voice tight with tension as she spoke to the defender's commander through a secure channel. What's the status? Varn's expression was grim. The Harbingers are here, and they are not alone. Hayes glanced at Ruiz, her mind racing. What do you mean, not alone? The Harbingers travel with lieutenants, captains of their fleet who are not just warriors, but masters of the mind. They can manipulate thoughts, create illusions, and even twist reality itself. They will come for you, and they will come for your most powerful weapon, your will to fight. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. The last bit of hope had just been stripped away. The Harbingers weren't just coming to conquer. They were coming to break humanity. On the horizon of Earth, the first wave of the Harbinger fleet appeared, a vast armada, black as void, their ships seemingly carved from the darkness of space itself. They hovered silently, their engines dark, their presence a chilling omen of what was to come. As humanity braced for the battle of its life, no one knew if they would survive what was about to unfold. The Harbingers had come, not as invaders, but as the final judgment. And now, it was up to Earth's greatest defenders, human and alien alike, to show that humanity was not just a force to be feared, but one that would fight until the end. The silence of space was broken by a deep, reverberating hum, a pulse that seemed to emanate from the very core of the Harbinger fleet. As the darkness of their ships loomed over Earth, a shadow fell across the planet. The Harbingers had arrived, their presence like an executioner's blade hanging over humanity's neck. In the command center, President Hayes and General Ruiz stood before the massive display screen, watching as the Harbinger fleet slowly advanced toward Earth. The planetary defense systems, newly enhanced by the Defender's technology, were ready, but the sheer magnitude of the enemy was overwhelming. The Harbingers didn't care about humanity's defenses. They didn't need to. They came to erase what they considered a threat to the balance of the universe. "We can't hold them off forever," Ruiz said, his voice tinged with concern. "We've seen their ships. We've seen their power. This is different." Hayes didn't reply immediately. Her mind was racing. The galaxy had never seen anything like the Harbingers, but she couldn't let fear take hold. If humanity was to survive, they had to fight with everything they had, and with everything the Defenders had taught them. "The Defenders are already in position," she said, her voice steady despite the urgency. "We'll hold them off for as long as we can. The real battle is going to be on the ground. Captain Vance and her team, along with the Defenders, will strike at the heart of the Harbinger fleet." Ruiz nodded. "And if they fail, then Earth dies," Hayes replied simply. "But they won't fail. They can't fail." Aboard the Defender ship, Captain Lara Vance stood with her team, preparing for their most dangerous mission yet. She was no stranger to combat, but what lay ahead was unlike anything she had ever faced. The Harbingers were not just an enemy. They were a force of nature, capable of bending reality itself. If they could break human will, there was little hope for any army in the galaxy. But Vance wasn't about to let that happen. "Everyone knows the stakes," she said, addressing the team. "The Harbingers don't come for conquest. They come to erase us. But we're not going to let them. We fight not just for survival, but for the right to exist, to show them that humanity has a place in this galaxy." The team exchanged determined glances. They knew the risks, but there was no fear in their eyes, only a grim resolve. "We won't be the ones to back down," Vance said, turning to the ship's control officer. "Initiate phase shift. We're going in." The ship hummed to life, its form beginning to flicker in and out of existence as it phased between dimensions, bypassing the Harbinger's immense fleet. The team knew they had to strike quickly and decisively. If they waited too long, the Harbinger's telepathic commanders would catch their presence, and that would be the end of the mission. As they approached the heart of the Harbinger fleet, Vance felt the weight of the moment. This was it, the final stand. They had no backup plan. There was no fallback, only forward. On the surface of Earth, humanity's forces mobilized, every soldier, every ship, every fighter jet on high alert. The skies were filled with the hum of engines as Earth's last-ditch effort began. The planet's defense systems activated, missiles, lasers, and energy shields powered up as the first Harbinger warships moved into Earth's orbit. But despite all the preparation, despite every weapon at their disposal, it was clear that humanity's true strength lay in their resilience and their unity. President Hayes addressed the world, her voice broadcast to every corner of the globe. "The Harbingers have come to destroy us, but we will show them that we are not afraid. This is not just the battle of our lives. It is the battle for every soul that calls this world home. We stand together as one species, one people, and we will not go down without a fight." The world erupted in cheers, but Hayes knew that words would not win this battle. It was going to be fought with blood, sweat, and an unyielding spirit. Back in the depths of the Harbinger fleet, Captain Vance's team materialized inside the central command ship of the Harbingers. The moment they arrived, they could feel the shift in the air, a strange, oppressive presence that seemed to invade their minds. The Harbingers didn't need to strike physically to harm their enemies. They could tear apart wills, distort thoughts, and unravel the very fabric of reality. Vance gritted her teeth and pushed forward. "Keep your minds focused," she warned her team. "They'll try to break us. Don't let them." They moved through the massive corridors of the Harbinger ship, a vessel unlike any they had ever seen. It was a haunting structure, alive with an eerie, pulsating energy. The walls seemed to shift, bending and warping as if they were part of a living organism, responding to their every step. Then they reached the heart of the ship, the command nexus, a vast chamber that pulsed with dark energy. At the center of the room stood a figure, a being of immense power, its form both humanoid and monstrous, with an aura that radiated authority. This was the Harbinger Commander, the entity that controlled the fleet. Vance's heart raced as the creature turned toward them, its eyes glowing with a chilling, telepathic force. The entire room seemed to warp, reality bending around them as the Harbinger's will pressed in on their minds. "You cannot defeat us," the Harbinger's voice echoed in their minds, a deep, ancient resonance that made the air itself vibrate. "You are a blip in the grand design. Your species will be eradicated, just as all others before you." Vance refused to yield. "We fight because we have something to protect. We fight because we choose to live." With a defiant roar, she and her team launched their attack. Weapons fired, cutting through the Harbinger's telepathic defenses, but it wasn't enough. The creature's will was overwhelming. For a moment, it seemed as if they would be crushed under the weight of its power. But then something unexpected happened. The defenders, having arrived alongside humanity's forces, activated their most powerful weapon, a surge of combined energy from the remnants of their ancient technology. The power of unity, humanity's resilience, and the defenders' technology hit the Harbinger Commander in full force. The room shattered as the Harbinger screamed, its telepathic grip disintegrating under the assault. The core of the ship began to destabilize, collapsing as the Harbinger Commander fell. Back on Earth, the sky above the planet seemed to crack open as a massive wave of energy surged out from the heart of the Harbinger fleet. The air buzzed with power as the remnants of the enemy fleet began to implode, torn apart by the surge. Humanity's last-ditch effort, combined with the Defenders' final strike, had won the day. The Harbingers had been defeated, not just by force, but by will. And in that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. President Hayes stood before the world once more, a weary but triumphant expression on her face. "We have won. The Harbingers are no more." But she knew this was not the end. This victory was just the beginning of humanity's place in the galaxy, no longer a pawn, but a force to be reckoned with.